Hey everyone and welcome. Today we're jumping headfirst into the writings of Donald Harvey Marx. Now he's a physician and a scientist, but he's also someone who isn't afraid to wade into some of the most tangled and tough conversations we're having right now. We're going to unpack his analysis of the language that's shaping and sometimes dividing us all.
So let's just get right to it with a question that, honestly, is tripping a lot of people up. Where is the line between being anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic? Or is there even a line at all? It's a huge, complicated knot, and we're going to use Marx's writing as our guide to try and untangle it.
Okay, so where do we even start? Well, Marx's whole point is that before we can have any kind of meaningful debate, we have to be crystal clear on the words we're using. So, first things first, let's break down the key terms just as he lays them out.
First up, anti-Semitism. According to Marx, when we talk about anti-Semitism, we're not just talking about a simple disagreement. It's way deeper than that. It's an ideology. He defines it as this deep-seated prejudice or hostility aimed at Jewish people as a group, often built on myths and scapegoating that are centuries old.
And then there's Zionism. Now, in Marx's view, this is fundamentally a political movement. It's all about the push for the Jewish people's right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland, the movement that ultimately created the State of Israel. He's careful to separate this political idea from Judaism as a religion or Jewishness as an ethnicity.
Okay, so this is where it gets really crucial in his analysis. The way he sees it, being anti-Zionist might mean you're criticizing the Israeli government's policies, or maybe you're opposed to the very idea of a Jewish state. But he argues a line gets crossed when that criticism turns into denying Jewish people the right to self-determination altogether, or when it starts using old, ugly anti-Semitic stereotypes, or, and this is a big one, when it holds all Jewish people everywhere responsible for what the Israeli government does.
So all this is great in theory, right? But what does it actually look like on the ground? Well, Marx takes us to his old stomping grounds, UCLA, to use it as a case study for how this incredibly blurry line plays out in the real world.
He lays out this timeline of what he describes happening at UCLA. It starts way back in the 1920s with these subtle, unspoken quotas on Jewish students. Then he jumps forward to his own time there in the 1960s, where he says he felt this strong undercurrent of anti-Semitism himself. Fast forward to 2014, things get more formal with student groups boycotting trips to Israel. And then it all culminates in 2024, after October 7th, where he describes the situation escalating into overt hostility, harassment, and even swastikas on campus.
And to really drive home how intense things got, Marx points to this incredibly stark quote from the spring of 2024. The claim is that during the campus protests, some Jewish students were physically blocked from entering certain areas, leading some to call it a Jew exclusion zone. It's a shocking phrase that shows just how fraught this situation had become.
So, to really get at the raw emotion fueling these kinds of conflicts, Marx does something interesting. He takes a step back from the headlines and actually turns to Shakespeare to dig into this really powerful, really human, and often really destructive drive for revenge.
And that brings us to Shylock from The Merchant of Venice. Marx's point here is, look, don't just write Shylock off as the one-dimensional bad guy. He wants us to see him as a deeply complex character, someone whose desire for that pound of flesh comes from a very real, very human place of wanting payback.
Marx really zooms in on that famous "hath not a Jew eyes" speech. He sees it as this powerful cry about how being constantly dehumanized and wronged can breed an intense desire for revenge. And that last line, "the villainy you teach me, I will execute," for Marx, that's the real gut punch. It's a chilling look at how hate just creates more hate.
Okay, so Shakespeare, revenge, how does this all circle back to today? Well, here's the connection Marx makes. He argues that those same old prejudices don't just disappear. Instead, they get a makeover. They get repackaged in the language of modern politics to make them sound more acceptable.
So Marx looks at some leftist, anti-capitalist arguments and points out a specific pattern. He describes how Israel gets framed as this colonial, capitalist oppressor, while the Palestinians are seen as the oppressed. The problem, he argues, is when old anti-Semitic ideas about Jewish people controlling global finance get mixed into this critique of capitalist elites. It's a way, he says, of laundering anti-Semitism, disguising it as legitimate political analysis.
But, and this is super important, Marx is really clear that this isn't just a one-sided issue. He believes this repackaging of harsh rhetoric happens all over the political map. So he pivots and turns his attention to the political right to show us what he means.
To make his point, he uses conservative commentator Charlie Kirk as an example.
He highlights what he presents as a pattern of harsh rhetoric aimed at the LGBTQ community, from misgendering an athlete to calling transgender people an abomination and pushing for a national ban on gender-affirming care.
And all of this, from both the left and the right, builds up to what is really the central thesis of his argument, that we desperately need to apply the same critical standard to harsh rhetoric, no matter who is speaking.
He basically asks, is there a double standard? He observes that while someone like Charlie Kirk gets a lot of public backlash for his comments, functionally similar rhetoric from some prominent Muslim clerics on the very same topics often flies under the radar. He suggests this might be because people are afraid of being called Islamophobic.
And to back this up, he provides a few examples from his research. He points to clerics who have called homosexuality a scourge, others who have blamed same-sex marriage for the COVID pandemic, and even religious leaders in the U.S. who signed statements calling gender-affirming procedures impermissible.
Okay, now this slide really puts it all together. This is the side-by-side comparison that's at the very heart of Marx's argument. He breaks it down. Look at the moral framing. One uses natural law, the other divine law. Look at the demeaning language, lies that abuse kids versus scourge of homosexuality, and the policy goals, both calling for legal restrictions. His point is that while the vocabulary is different, the underlying rhetorical function is almost identical.
And this all boils down to his final conclusion, which he puts really bluntly. The content is the same. The criticism should be the same. Harmful rhetoric is harmful, period. And for him, it doesn't matter if you hear it in a mosque, a church, or at a political rally. The standard should be consistent.
And that leaves us with this final, really challenging question to think about. When we hear this kind of speech, how do we get past the political labels, left-wing, right-wing, religious, and focus on the actual human impact of the words being said? It's a tough question, but it's the one Marx's work really pushes us to confront.